It's Wednesday, the 16th of September 2020. Welcome to Fear and Greed, the business podcast that sets you up for a successful day. I'm Sean Aylmer. The Reserve Bank hints that the Australian dollar is too strong and warns on house prices. That's our main story. Also coming up in today's podcast, Qantas mulls a shift in head office away from Sydney, triggering a race between the states. Finally, there's some easing of border restrictions, and buy now, pay later groups have a significant legal win. Later in the podcast, I talk to EY's Jenelle McMaster about the traits that make a successful CEO in a COVID-19 world. But first, here's a brief look at markets. It was a positive night on Wall Street with tech stocks leading markets higher ahead of the Federal Reserve's monthly meeting tonight. European markets were also generally up. Back home, the S&P ASX 200 ended the day down just 5 points to 5,895 points. The banks were the worst performers, led down by ANZ, which dropped 1.9%. Telstra was the poorest of the top 20 stocks, down more than 2%. The oil companies also struggled after the Organisation of Petroleum Exporting Countries forecast weaker demand for the rest of this year, and travel groups continued their volatile ride, with many losing ground. Market leader CSL had a strong day, up 1.5%, as did property groups and gold miners. Overnight, oil prices rose by around 3% on fears that Hurricane Sally in the Gulf of Mexico will disrupt supplies. Gold prices were flat. The Aussie dollar was trading higher against the weaker greenback and is worth a little over 73 US cents. The total number of coronavirus cases worldwide is now 29.4 million, with 930,000 deaths. The Reserve Bank has weighed into the debate over the strength of the Australian dollar, saying the recent increase in its value will not help the economy. The comments in the Reserve Bank's board minutes comes after months of keeping quiet on the currency, and 24 hours after Macquarie Group said the stronger exchange rate was hurting its earnings. The Australian dollar has been among the best performing global currencies in recent months, and it rose again yesterday. The Reserve Bank, by refusing to cut interest rates, has played a hand in the strong currency. So too has high iron ore prices and a weaker US dollar. The Reserve Bank's minutes yesterday did little to convince most market economists that the official interest rate would change anytime soon. The central bank said house prices for established homes in Melbourne, and to a lesser extent Sydney, had fallen in recent months, adding that there was likely to be downward pressure on property rents. That's bad news for investors. The comments were supported by SQM research figures, which showed vacancy rates in Melbourne and Adelaide at record highs. Also, Bureau of Statistics figures showed that the average price of a home in New South Wales and Victoria both fell by around $20,000 during the June quarter, to $872,000 and $737,000 respectively. Prices in all capital cities fell during the period, with the exception of Canberra. The Reserve Bank also expects to see the number of active job seekers rising through the rest of 2020. They warned that even outside Victoria, the pace of jobs recovery seems to have slowed. It repeated previous comments that the state governments should spend more to lift their economies, saying government debt levels were relatively low, meaning states had the firepower to spend. The central bank is clearly worried, but it's using its power to jawbone governments to invest and influence variables like the dollar and house prices. That's a good use of its power. In a moment, the rest of the news you need to know this morning. Sharp listeners may have noticed something new in the Fear and Greed playlist yesterday afternoon. It's the brand new Fear and Greed Afternoon Market Report. In just a few minutes, I'll tell you everything you need to know about the day's financial markets and the world of economics. Another new episode will be there this afternoon at 5:30. Make sure you've hit subscribe or follow, and please give it a listen. I'd love to know what you think. Get in touch on Twitter, LinkedIn or Facebook, or through our website fearandgreed.com.au. Overseas news first up. China, the world's second largest economy, is rebounding sharply with an acceleration in industrial production last month and a pickup in retail sales. The 5.6% rebound in manufacturing was better than forecast. It triggered a rally in the yuan, which is now up more than 5% against the US dollar since May. The positive news came as the Asian Development Bank forecast that East Asia, led by China, will recover faster than other parts of the region. Democrat presidential nominee Joe Biden labelled Donald Trump a climate arsonist in the wake of the deadly wildfires in California. Drawing a clear distinction between the two candidates on climate change, Mr. Biden said 4 more years of Donald Trump would guarantee more dramatic events. The president was visiting California and evaded questions on climate change, instead blaming forest management for the catastrophe. The World Trade Organization overnight found that the US violated international regulations by imposing tariffs on more than $234 billion worth of Chinese exports. Not that the decision will make much difference in the real world, the Trump government doesn't support the WTO. And Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain overnight signed a diplomatic pact to normalise relations between the Jewish state and the two Arab nations. While the UAE and Bahrain still support Palestine's claims over Israel, all three have a common opposition in Iran and its aggressive attitude in the region. On to local news. Qantas is considering moving its headquarters away from Sydney Airport, with the new Western Sydney Airport an option, so to Melbourne, Brisbane or Adelaide. The airline will conduct a group-wide property review of its rented space, including corporate offices. It currently has 49,000 square metres in Mascot, Sydney, and a large amount of space in Collingwood in Melbourne, and spends $40 million in rent on leased offices. Some aviation facilities, such as flight simulator centres and heavy maintenance facilities, could also be relocated, particularly if the group can find somewhere to bring it all together. Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews said he'd held talks with Qantas boss Alan Joyce about shifting the HQ to Melbourne. The airline has also spoken to the New South Wales, South Australian and Queensland governments. State governments will be falling over themselves to attract an icon like Qantas. South Australia reopened its border with the ACT last night, lifting the 14-day quarantine period that had applied. Restrictions on New South Wales travellers will remain. Regional Victoria will come out of lockdown tomorrow, after the state recorded no new deaths from the coronavirus in a 24-hour period for the first time since June. Definitely welcome news. Prime Minister Scott Morrison welcomed South Australia's decision and urged other premiers to reopen their borders. There were 42 new cases of COVID-19 yesterday in Victoria, 7 in New South Wales and 1 in Queensland. Mr Morrison was in Newcastle yesterday in New South Wales, announcing his plan to establish low-cost gas supplies across the country by underwriting pipelines and potentially using the Snowy Hydro Limited to build a gas-fired power station. I talked about this yesterday. The response from industry was, well, lukewarm at best, saying the plans could derail private investment in the sector. The PM was also asked about increasing taxes to pay back all the spending that's going on. He was pretty adamant, saying whacking up people's taxes and hoping for the best is not a plan but a gouge. Clearly there's no tax hikes in next month's budget. A win for the buy now pay later sector. The Australian Competition Tribunal has found that interest-free instalment products provide benefits to the economy and do not result in consumer harm. The tribunal rejected the competition watchdog's calls that buy now pay later companies are licensed and conduct responsible lending checks as set out in credit laws. The harm to consumers came from selling practices, not the payment mechanism, the tribunal found. Not so good, though, for Afterpay. A report from Citi Research said that the company's momentum had slowed dramatically in August, with US website visits up only 1% during the month. That's despite promotional sales in August and follows a recent entry of PayPal into the buy now, pay later space. Afterpay share price ended up 3.5% yesterday, though it's still trading about 20% below its peak of 3 weeks ago. Media reports say that private equity group TPG Capital is in exclusive talks to buy iconic boots and outback apparel retailer RM Williams. The cost is about $200 million, according to the reports, well down from the price bandied around last year. Opticom, which manufactures and lays fibre optic cable in greenfield sites, is the centre of a takeover bid between Unity Group and First State Super. Last week I said First State wanted to be the first super fund to buy an ASX-listed company in full. Well, yesterday Unity Group upped its offer to match the $600 million bid by First State and said it had taken a 19.5% stake in Opticom, making it tougher for First State Super to win the battle. Seven West Media yesterday made a partial payment for the rights to broadcast cricket this coming summer to Cricket Australia and then said it wouldn't pay any more. The media group is due to pay $450 million over 4 years to broadcast the sport, but has complained about the quality of the product. It wants an independent expert to assess what a fair recalibration of rights should be. Good luck with that. The federal government and Telstra will join forces to create a new cyber defence program aimed at identifying and blocking scammers pretending to be MyGov and Centrelink employees. Australians have lost $6.4 million to scammers pretending to be Service Australia representatives. The Finance Sector Union has rejected an offer from the Commonwealth Bank to give 30,000 staff a 2% and 1.5% annual pay rise over the next 2 years. Some higher paid workers will receive less. The bank said the offer was higher than inflation and fair, given its determination to safeguard jobs in the current economic environment. There's also industrial action around the wharves. DP World yesterday applied to the Fair Work Commission to stop go-slows by wharfies, which could delay around 10 cargo vessels from docking at Sydney's Port Botany over the next 2 weeks. DP World said the action will cause damage to the economy. The Australian Retailers Association said that up to 90% of its members are experiencing stock or supply chain disruptions due to the coronavirus. When the pandemic hit, many retailers initially cancelled orders, only to find sales remaining strong. Outside of Victoria, the strength in sales has meant retailers have run out of stock. In an insightful story in the Financial Review today, the maker of Old El Paso Mexican food products, Latina Fresh Pasta, Betty Crocker cake mixes and Haagen-Dazs ice cream has enjoyed a 15% sales spike in Victoria during the harder lockdowns of the past few weeks. Demand for comfort food, as the group puts it, is also staying elevated in other states, with sales up about 4% in Queensland and South Australia, where a shift towards more home cooking continues. And finally, SBS has locked in the broadcast rights to the Tour de France for an extra 7 years through till 2030. There's nowhere else I'd prefer to watch it. We've spoken a lot on Fear and Greed about how COVID-19 is bringing about change, social change, changing the economy, and changes in the way we do business. It's a topic that's also been explored in depth by EY. Jenelle McMaster, EY Managing Partner, Oceania Markets, has interviewed 30 of Australia's top CEOs, looking at what they've learnt during the pandemic, how their companies have evolved, and what is setting the outperformers apart from the rest. I'm pleased to say that Jenelle McMaster is my guest this morning. Jenelle, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thank you, Sean. Great to be here.
Now, you managed to identify top traits that have helped outperformers during the COVID crisis. The first one you mentioned is humanity. That's about putting people first?
Yeah, that's right. I think it's an unapologetic, human-centred, putting people first, where people have sort of led with the mantra of saving lives, saving jobs. They've worked very hard to ensure the physical and psychological safety of their people and the shifting needs of customers. They've well understood that while fortunes are made in good times, and this is certainly a quote from one CEO, reputations are made in bad times. And so they've led with kindness, they've led with respect, they've set the tone for care and kindness, which then perpetuates in the organisation in really big and really small gestures. I know in our own organisation at EY, our talent team, they were facing their own fears, the safety of their jobs. There was no recruitment happening during this period of time, but then they mobilised as a care army for our teams. I've seen CEOs really have an acute awareness of the haves and the have-nots, and that there will be winners and losers here. And I was talking to one CEO, so Steve Worrell, the CEO of Microsoft Australia, clearly a tech business that's been thriving during this period of time, definitely one of the winners out of this, but his focus has been on what opportunity his company and others can do to level the playing field, to address the many inequities that still exist across our society that has certainly been laid bare through the pandemic. So I think whether it's at the individual or the organisational or the societal level, that care for humanity has really come through in these leaders.
It's also great on Zoom calls to see your CEO, dog running behind them or kid running behind them when you only ever see them in a suit.
It's a great level,
you see them as
isn't it?
human. Yeah,
absolutely.
Another trait was empathy.
Empathy and humanity definitely go hand in hand. But perhaps, one thing I've noticed coming through as a consistent theme is the CEOs who genuinely recognise that we're all in this crisis, but that not everyone is experiencing the crisis in the same way. Some people thrive on working from home. Others find it incredibly soul-destroying and isolating. And so they've sought to understand the different experiences, acknowledge them. You know, one CEO said to me, we're in the same storm, but each of us is sailing in different boats. And, you know, really having that empathy. The CEO of Domain said in listening to his customers and listening to the partners of their organization, what they understood was that there were so many agents in the industry really struggling. And so as a result of hearing that information, they extended their employee assistance program externally to any agent in the industry who needed someone to talk to because they wanted to address the mental health. And that's truly empathic to the needs of people in the industry.
The third trait, optimism?
Definitely there's just been a common theme of optimism across all of these CEOs. And I'm not sure that they became optimistic during a pandemic. I think there's a predisposition.
Most CEOs are optimistic beings anyway.
I think so. I think that natural skew towards glass half full may well be one of the reasons why they're in the positions that they're in. It's not a blind optimism. I will state that people plan for the worst, hope for the best. They're not lamenting what was. Rather, they are sort of embracing what could be in this. And certainly another CEO that comes to mind was Don May. He's the CEO of Domino's Pizza.
I'm going to jump in here. Don May is literally the most optimistic individual in the top 200 stocks, I reckon.
I'm right there with you. You know, he refers to himself as the Chief Enthusiasm Officer.
Oh, I know.
And, look, one of the many, many things that he has said that I'm in awe of, but, you know, every day is a training day at Domino's. Every day is a day of learning and development. You're either providing it or you're receiving it, but every day is a training day. So I think if you have that kind of crisis as the curriculum, every day is a training day, it's a mindset that sets a tone and an intention around optimism.
Now, the fourth one is transparency. And the interesting thing, we've spoken to a few people on Fear and Greed in the investment community, and what they've said they've been really impressed by CEOs in listed companies is their ability to come out during the crisis and say, we don't know. Yeah,
absolutely. It definitely has been one of those traits. And I think maybe there is an element of permission here because everybody knows that nobody knows. Yeah. Everybody knows that if you say that you do know, I think they'd call BS on it, right? So you've suddenly got this permission, I think, to not have all the answers. And I think that makes this much more credible and authentic when you say, I don't know it all, but this is what I know for right now. It may well change. These are the principles that we've got. And when it changes, we'll let you know too. So I think there's just this real permission to lead with that kind of transparency.
The final trait was courage.
Yeah, look, I think this is undoubtedly a time for courageous leadership. It does take courage to lead from the front, navigating a crisis that no one has ever sort of experienced before, that's going for an indeterminate period of time. I think it takes courage to make decisions with imperfect information that's changing all the time. It also takes courage to unmake decisions when new information comes to hand. And I've talked to a lot of leaders, you know, right at the beginning particularly, who said, you know, this is like wartime leadership. So I think it takes courage to move into that more decisive, less consultative leadership when in crisis mode. It takes courage to disrupt your own thinking, and it takes courage to let go of the past, which is particularly when, you know, the recognition that what got us here won't necessarily get us there. And those are the things that you've traditionally held on to.
Jenelle, thank you very much for joining us on Fear and Greed.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on your podcast, Sean.
Thank you. That was Jenelle McMaster, EY Managing Partner, Oceania Markets. There's a huge amount more to my conversation with Jenelle that we just couldn't fit in, and I really do urge you to listen to the extended interview, which is available now as bonus content. Jenelle's got some great examples of the traits that she's identified, including the courage shown by Naomi Simpson, boss of Red Balloon, when the pandemic hit, and a great story about the company that converted part of its employees' salaries into equity in the company in the middle of the pandemic. Make time to check it out. It's worth it. Another day, another cracking review from a happy listener. This time it's Powerhouse92, who posted this review on Apple Podcasts. I've only been listening to the Fear and Greed podcast for the past 2 weeks, but I find it refreshing to get the latest business news in a short summary format. It's straight to the point on what you need to know without bias. The bonus interviews are also interesting. Keep up the great work, Sean and team. Thank you for the support. The team, as Powerhouse92 put it, is only 3 people. That's right, there's just 3 of us here bringing you fresh episodes 7 days a week. Another reason why we need your help to spread the word. It's Wednesday, the 16th of September, 2020. I'm Sean Aylmer, and that was Fear and Greed. Enjoy your day.